They expected Iran to collapse. They thought sanctions would suffocate it. They believed isolation would break its will. But year after year, headline after headline, threat after threat, Iran remained standing. Not only standing, but responding. Not only surviving, but rising. The world watched as superpowers made bold predictions, drew red lines, and raised economic weapons, yet somehow, the country they wanted on its knees kept walking forward quietly, proudly, with something far deeper than politics, something they couldn't see, something they couldn't understand. Because what they didn't realize is that Iran is not just a country on the map. It is not just a collection of cities, borders, and military bases. Iran is an idea, a belief, a fire lit long ago in the deserts of Karbala, in the streets of Tehran, in the voices of a people who refuse to be colonized, puppeted, or bought. It is a nation built not just on laws, but on legacy. A spiritual defiance runs through its history, the kind that teaches you to rise when the world expects you to fall, the kind that tells a boy in the slums of Gaza or the valleys of Lebanon that dignity is worth dying for, the kind that remembers Hussein A.S. and refuses to bow to any Yazid, no matter how powerful. The West has armies, they have dollars, they have media, but Iran has memory, and it has meaning. The memory of oppression, the memory of revolution, the memory of standing alone and still holding the line. From the streets of the Islamic Revolution in 1979 to the echoes of Qasem Soleimani's funeral that shook the world, Iran has never just been about politics. It has always been about purpose. That's why they can't break it. Because you can crush a country's economy, you can bomb its cities, you can even assassinate its heroes. But how do you destroy an idea? How do you defeat a nation that believes death with dignity is better than life with humiliation? That's why they fear Iran. Not because it has the strongest army, but because it has the strongest soul. And that soul spreads. It spreads in the form of resistance in Palestine, in the steadfastness of Yemen, in the courage of Hezbollah, in the tears of those who still mourn Karbala, not as a past event, but as a present mission. That's why Iran remains, because it never truly fights alone. It stands with the oppressed, and the oppressed stand with it. And as long as injustice exists, so will voices that rise against it. Ziron's weapons may rust, its economy may shake, but its spirit, that cannot be sanctioned. That cannot be invaded. That cannot be bought or sold. And in the silence of the world, when they tried to erase its pride, Iran answered not with words, but with action. It hit back. It stood firm. It mourned. It buried. It prayed. And then it rose again. This is not the story of a perfect nation. It is the story of a people who chose dignity over comfort, faith over fear, and meaning over materialism. This is why Iran is the one country the West can't defeat, because their battle was never just on land or air, it was always in the heart. And Iran's heart still beats, strong, unbroken, unafraid. They tried to defeat Iran with weapons, but they didn't understand that Iran's greatest weapon wasn't made of steel or fire, it was belief. For many, belief is just a word, something passive and quiet. But in Iran, belief is action. It's tears shed in prayer, fists raised in protest, children named after martyrs, and streets echoing with stories of sacrifice. It is belief that has kept Iran standing when logic said it should have fallen. It is belief that gave birth to a revolution that shook the world, and it is belief that continues to confuse those who try to analyze Iran purely through military charts or economic graphs. Because what Iran holds deep within is something they never factored in. The power of faith. This belief is not blind. It's not built on fairy tales or slogans. It's built on history, on centuries of resistance, on the legacy of prophets, imams, and scholars who taught the people that dignity cannot be negotiated. From the day of Ashura, when Hussein stood with 72 companions against an army of thousands, Iran's spiritual DNA was formed. That story didn't remain in books, it entered hearts. And every time Iran is pushed, pressured, or punished, it remembers that stand, that example, that moment in Karbala, when a handful of believers proved that truth is not about numbers, but about conviction. This belief extends beyond the borders of Iran. It inspires Palestinians in the rubble of Gaza, resistance fighters in South Lebanon, and freedom seekers across the Muslim world. It is a torch passed through generations, not through politics, but through poetry, mourning, and remembrance. The young people of Iran may grow up in modern cities, scrolling through phones like any other youth, but many of them still cry when they hear stories of Zainab Asi, of Ali Akbar Asi, of the sacrifices that gave meaning to their existence. That's not weakness, that's strength, that's power. So when the West tried to conquer Iran by force, they underestimated what can't be measured, the spirit. Iran's people don't fear death because they believe in something beyond this world. And when you can't scare someone with death, you can't defeat them. This is why Iran remains, because belief is stronger than bullets, and faith is a fire that no bomb can extinguish. They say wars are won with power, politics, and precision, but Iran proves that some battles are won with patience. While the world races ahead with weapons and alliances, Iran walks a slower path, one paved with strategy, resilience, and time-tested wisdom. Patience in Iran isn't passive. It's not waiting in fear. It's active endurance. It's the quiet strength that watches the enemy shout, threaten, and scheme, but doesn't flinch. It's the calm of a nation that knows storms will pass and truth will rise when dust settles. This patience isn't a weakness. It's survival. It's resistance. And it's power in disguise. From the moment the Islamic Revolution began in 1979, Iran has been targeted by sanctions, isolation, propaganda, and direct threats. Others would have collapsed under that pressure. Economies would have crumbled, leaders would have fled, and people would have given up. But Iran didn't. It adjusted. It adapted. It stood still when it had to and moved quietly when no one expected. Instead of begging for acceptance, it built its own systems. Instead of crying for help, it turned inward, creating, learning, and relying on its own people. That's not just patience. That's vision. That's long-term thinking in a world obsessed with short-term gains. Iran's patience is also deeply rooted in its spiritual worldview. In a culture shaped by the Quran, by stories of prophets and imams, patience is not just a trait, it's a command. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was patient in Mecca despite years of mockery and attack. Imam Hussein was patient in Karbala even as he stood on the edge of martyrdom. Iran inherited that patience. It learned from those who understood that sometimes the greatest victories come not in battlefields, but in outlasting the oppressor. To endure is to win. This is why Iran often doesn't react with speed or emotion. When its generals are martyred, when its scientists are assassinated, when its name is dragged through headlines, Iran holds back. It watches. It calculates. And then, when it strikes, the world listens. Because the power of patience is that it builds pressure. And when that pressure is finally released, it's not loud, it's historic. Iran doesn't shout to be heard, it waits. Because it knows a response rooted in patience carries the weight of history, and that can shake the world more than any missile ever could. They tried to isolate Iran, to surround it with sanctions, cut it off from the global economy, blacklist its leaders, ban its scientists, and silence its voice. But instead of breaking, Iran became more self-reliant. The attempt to isolate backfired. Iran didn't fall into despair. It turned inward and began to build. From medicine to missiles, from energy to engineering, Iran discovered that isolation wasn't a cage, it was a classroom. And inside that classroom, it learned how to stand on its own feet. The world thought isolation would bring Iran to its knees. Instead, it taught Iran how to rise without asking for permission. In every corner of the country, industries that were once dependent on imports began developing their own solutions. Iranian scientists, engineers, and thinkers started to innovate, not because it was trendy, but because survival demanded it. A young generation, born under sanctions, began to view adversity not as an obstacle, but as a challenge to overcome. Universities flourished, knowledge spread. Homegrown technology became a badge of pride. Iran showed that dignity isn't found in begging others. It's found in believing in yourself when the world refuses to help you. This self-reliance also gave Iran a moral advantage. While other nations crumbled under foreign pressure or sold their values for economic benefits, Iran stood firm in its principles. It refused to trade its independence for luxury. It refused to bow down just to get a seat at someone else's table. And that, more than anything, confused the world. In a time when countries chase popularity and profit, Iran chose pride. It may have lost trade routes and foreign investments, but it gained something far more powerful: a generation that believes in itself. And that's the real threat Iran poses to its enemies, not just its missiles or alliances, but its model. A nation that can resist, rebuild, and rise while being surrounded is a dangerous example. It sets a precedent. It gives hope to the oppressed. It says you don't have to surrender your soul to survive. That is why Iran remains defiant, because it knows that real strength doesn't come from others, it comes from within. And no amount of isolation can silence a nation that's found its voice in self-reliance. Iran's strength lies in its ideological unity, not just political leadership, but a shared belief that resisting oppression is a duty, not a choice. From the government to the people, from scholars to farmers, there is a deep-rooted conviction that Iran's battle is not just for land or pride, it's for principle. And principles, when deeply held, are more powerful than any army. This unity doesn't mean every citizen agrees with every policy. It means that when the nation is threatened, when foreign powers attempt to humiliate or dominate, Iran closes ranks. Disagreements vanish. The people rise as one body, because their identity is tied to something larger than themselves. This ideological strength is built on centuries of history. Iran remembers the invasions of the Mongols, the colonization attempts by Britain and Russia, the CIA-led coup in 1953. It remembers the imposed war with Iraq, the martyrs who defended the nation, the sanctions that tried to starve its spirit. These memories are not wounds, they are fuel. They shape Iran's narrative as a country that refuses to be broken, no matter how powerful the enemy. And this narrative creates a culture of resistance that is passed from parent to child, from mosque to classroom, from books to poetry. The West underestimates this power because it's not visible on graphs or maps. But it's real, it's emotional, it's unshakable. When young Iranians march, speak, or sacrifice, they do so with the conviction that they are part of something sacred. It's not nationalism in the shallow sense. It's a belief that Iran's struggle is tied to justice for the oppressed everywhere. Palestine, Yemen, Lebanon. These are not just names, they are causes. And Iran's ideological unity connects them all. That's why no amount of media distortion or international isolation can erase what Iran stands for. Its resistance isn't based on hate, it's based on dignity. This unity is what makes Iran unpredictable and undefeatable. Because when you fight an enemy with weapons, you may win. But when you face a nation driven by belief, memory, and mission, you're not just fighting soldiers. You're confronting a soul. And that soul doesn't surrender. While many countries rely on alliances to project strength, Iran has built something different. A network of influence rooted in ideology, loyalty, and shared struggle. These are not just allies of convenience. They are groups, movements, and nations that see Iran not as a power broker, but as a symbol of defiance. From Lebanon's Hezbollah to Yemen's Ansarullah, from Iraq's popular mobilization units to Syria's resistance factions, Iran has built bonds forged in the crucible of war and resistance. This network isn't held together by treaties or dollars. It's held together by sacrifice. And that makes it resilient in ways Western alliances often aren't. Unlike military coalitions formed for political gain, Iran's regional influence is built on decades of shared suffering. In times of crisis, when the bombs fall or the sanctions hit, these groups don't abandon Iran, they draw closer. They remember who stood by them when the world turned away. Iran doesn't just send weapons, it sends doctors, teachers, advisors, and support for rebuilding shattered communities. This approach creates loyalty that can't be bought or coerced. And it means that when Iran speaks, its words carry weight far beyond its borders. In the streets of Gaza, in the camps of the displaced, in the ruins of war-torn cities, where resistance still flickers, this reach isn't limited to the battlefield. It's cultural, it's spiritual. Iran's commitment to independence, to standing against global injustice, resonates with millions across the Muslim world. And while politicians may fear it, the oppressed often find hope in it. Iran gives voice to those forgotten by global diplomacy, the ones who have no lobbyists, no media, no power, and that voice, amplified through countless communities, creates a silent revolution. Not loud in headlines, but loud in hearts. That is why the West struggles to contain Iran. Not because it's the richest or the most militarily advanced, but because its influence spreads through human conviction, not cold calculations. An influence built on conviction cannot be defeated by drones or sanctions. It lives in memory, in loyalty, and in pain turned into power. Iran's ability to withstand immense pressure from some of the most powerful nations in the world comes from one simple yet profound truth. It has learned how to survive alone. Unlike many countries that depend on Western financial systems, imported technology, or diplomatic protection, Iran has built an ecosystem that thrives in isolation. For decades, it has been sanctioned, threatened, and excluded. But instead of collapsing, it adapted. It created its own industries. It trained its own scientists. It built alternative trade routes and diplomatic ties with non-Western powers. It turned economic war into economic resistance, and from resistance, it found resilience. While other nations panic under pressure, Iran has become calm in the storm. It expects the struggle. It prepares for it. Sanctions don't surprise Iran anymore. They challenge it. And with every new obstacle, Iran finds a new way. Whether it's developing its own missiles, advancing nuclear knowledge under watchful eyes, or growing crops without foreign fertilizers, Iran keeps proving that survival doesn't depend on global approval. It depends on self-belief, resourcefulness, and patience. The country has become a master of strategic patience, taking hits without falling, absorbing losses without surrendering its goals. This doesn't mean life is easy inside Iran. The people face hardships, inflation, and global isolation. But the pain has shaped their strength. They've learned to live without what others think is essential. And in that process, Iran has carved out a rare kind of freedom. The freedom of not being dependent on the systems that try to control you. That's a kind of power money can't buy and armies can't take away. This self-reliance is also why Iran is unpredictable. The usual pressure tactics, embargoes, diplomatic threats, military posturing don't work the way they do elsewhere. Iran's response is not always immediate or expected, but it is always calculated. It understands long-term strategy better than short-term panic. It plays the waiting game because it knows that endurance often wins where power fails. In the end, Iran's refusal to bow down has inspired others. It has shown smaller nations, resistance movements, and even individuals that you can survive when the world turns its back, if you are willing to stand tall on your own feet. Iran's journey is not one of mere survival. It's a story of strength, strategy, and silent defiance. While others bend under pressure, Iran rises through it. Its power doesn't come from wealth or weaponry alone, but from the unwavering spirit of its people, its deep cultural roots, and its refusal to be shaped by foreign hands. The reason the West can't defeat Iran isn't because Iran is invincible. It's because it is unyielding. It has learned how to breathe in isolation, how to turn pain into purpose, and how to build alliances not just with governments, but with hearts across the world. In a time when global narratives are shaped by media giants and military giants, Iran stands as a reminder that sometimes quiet resistance can echo louder than all the noise. Thank you for watching, for thinking deeply, and for reflecting on a story that often goes untold. If this video gave you a new perspective, share it. Let the silence be broken. Let the truth be heard.